Hello again, Steve here with a little bit of a discussion on a book I just started reading, which was introduced to me, and it is called Adult Children of Abusive Parents. It is by Stephen Farmer. It says, a healing program for those who have been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. Like I say, I just started it, and it is an interesting read into, I think we probably discussed it a couple times before, about how we are, the programs that we run on are so much to do with nurture, right? We talk about nurture and nature. And obviously, from any way that we can objectively measure anyways, we didn't choose our nurturing, our early nurturing anyway. We were born into a culture, a family, a society of all sorts of authority figures, right? Parents most notably. And what he says in there, although I just briefly got into it, is that an estimated, I don't have the actual quote where this came from, but because I just wrote a couple of notes down, but it says in there that anyways that anywhere from 80 to 95% of people the term abuse can be used to the way they were raised, to some extent anyways, along those categories of emotional, sexual, physical abuse, some sort of thing like that. That's a lot. And when we look at ourselves and we look at others and we wonder why people behave in certain ways, especially how they hold back and how we might be nervous and emotionally debilitated at times, it's not surprising when we start to realize that a full 80 to 95% of people have been abused to some extent. That's almost all of us, right? As children. And this doesn't go away. I mean, the scars, he talks about in there about how, if there's physical abuse, there can be scars. People were beaten up, that sort of thing, there can be scars. But to most people, objectively, especially emotional, because even when there's physical scars, there's also emotional scars. But there can be just emotional scars. And those don't have an objective measurement, perhaps, for the eyes. But for those who are skilled enough to be able to discuss with somebody, they can find these emotional scars. And when they can be worked on, and he's got a whole sort of an introduction onto what people can do in terms of those who have been seriously scarred in life. Once again, talking along the lines of improving the quality of our life experience, anytime we find blockages or, faulty programming, if we can get in there and fix it somehow and tune it and reintroduce more healthy programming into our lives, we can have a more constructive, more productive, more quality, enjoyed, happy life. I think this is an important topic to talk about. So, the other thing he talked about is that about 80% of abuse, what is considered child abuse in these categories, the emotional, physical, comes from parents or guardians, which is not surprising because, during the formative years, we call it like something like 80 or 70 to 80% of what are the programming that takes place in the first 5 years. And those first 5 years are the time when the child spends most of his or her time with family, right? Whether that family be a biological mother and father, or adopted parents, or split families, new guardians, this sort of thing. Those people who are the ones who are in the caregiving relationship of children are the ones 80% most likely to abuse children physically, emotionally. And throughout history, children were seen as basically property of their guardians, of their parents, and therefore they could do whatever they damn well pleased with the child if they felt that it was to benefit the child and the future of the child, and Of course, in the Western world, this was often coming from the perspective of spare the rod, spoil the child, right? So it was almost an imperative to to beat children in some way, either emotional, scolding them, berating them, hitting them, all these sorts of things, in order to mold. Just like if you're going to carve a statue, you have to take a hammer and chisel away and chip away and mold that into a likeness of some sort. And so it's not surprising that 80% of the damage comes from parents. But once again, because this was considered to be the right, and not only the right but the necessity of the caregivers, the parents, there were no real social mores or social laws against this, prohibitions, overtly anyway. And I think he's probably American, probably from the States, I'm guessing. It's because he uses a lot of stats. A lot of stats come from the States, right? Stats and states, I guess, go together, because it's the biggest social experiment in the last several hundred years in the United States. So he talks about how there were no legal prohibitions against child abuse. The concept of child abuse didn't really even exist. They said the first law that was written was in 1964 in one of the states. And within about 5 years, all the states adopted similar things. So that's, I was born in 1965. It wasn't much before that where there was no such thing as child abuse anywhere. In fact, he talks about how, I think it was 1876 was the first court case in the United States where a child who had been seriously beaten, and the culprits were known, I guess, as overtly the ones who admitted it. Were the parents, we have the right to do this kind of thing. The child was disobedient, we beat them to an inch of his life or whatever. And because there was no way to defend this child whatsoever, it was the SPCA, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, that actually brought the case forward with the argument that a child is at least an animal. You see, because the people who beat that kid wouldn't get away with that if they were beating a dog and they were found out, or beating their pig, or beating their cow, or whatever, because the SPCA could come after them and say, hang on a second, you're abusing a child, you're abusing an animal, and the animal doesn't know any better. You should know better, and therefore you should be punished for, I'm not saying I agree with the way the system works, but this was the argument. And the argument that the SPCA apparently made was that the child is at least an animal, so therefore should be given the equal protection that an animal is given. So this was the first introduction to it, apparently, of the importance of guarding children. So how is this important to improving the quality of our lives? Most of us, if that's correct, 80-95% have been either emotionally or physically and or emotionally injured or harmed by abuse of generally authority figures, mostly family. And we're living out our lives with those scars. How does that relate to improving the quality of our lives? Well, if we can first admit it and begin to, if we feel in such a way, we begin to read such information that is as credible as we can find, and we can get in touch with, at least admit it that we were, and then realize that, okay, I really don't know how, but at least I probably just at first realizing it, that this has happened, and we're not going to change the past, but we can create a new past. I think that's my suggestion, that's my guess. We can create a new past, we can create history, because today becomes history tomorrow. And he has strategies in there that, I've heard of some people. I think Dr. John Bradshaw perhaps was into this quite a while ago, about getting in touch with your inner child and reliving childhood, but on a level that is set by us. And this helps some people, because people who've been heavily traumatized by this live with the scars of that child inside. And if we can relive that, and I think that this is just a guess, I could be completely wrong on this, but I think one of the reasons why religion is so powerful to so many people, especially people who've been abused, is, well, first of all, very often the abuse has been perpetrated by those who call themselves religious, and they're doing it in the name of God. Because I love you. I remember that was used on me. I love you, therefore I have to do this to you. And but the people remain. The cycle continues. People go back into the same religion, and they connect with their imagination of what this loving God is, and this very motherly character, as I grew up with, this Virgin Mary character, this all-loving character. But perhaps that is kind of a way of, it's like a band-aid, and it's like a therapy, an inner therapy, because there's an inner and outer world, right? The outer world is what we see as what has attacked us. So we got to go and then we try to compensate, of course, for all that messed up with outside stuff, with more sex and more alcohol and more houses and cars and all sorts of stuff. We sort of try to compensate and fill holes in the inner world, right? But we create, I think one of the reasons why people can become very, almost like charismatically involved in their inner world to do with their God, is because they create a new father, and they create a new mother, and they create a child as themselves in the arms, in the bosom of that godly character who is all loving and all powerful. This is what I see in terms of evangelical people that I've met who have this relationship with Jesus, this all loving character. To me, that is a therapy for sure. At least it's a therapy. But perhaps we can all do things like that. I don't know. There's lots that we can do in our inner world. What I'm saying here isn't coming from any sort of educated perspective. I would just wanted to share that I was beginning to read this book because I think it is very important for many, many people. I would say, I would agree with them, the vast majority of people, vast majority of us are injured in a way by our upbringing. And I'm not going to even go to the point of whether to lay blame or anything. That's not my point here on where that begins. It's just for us to recognize it, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are responsible for our individuality. And if there's a way that we can improve the quality of our lives, and then it behooves us to do it, right? And if one of those things that's holding us back is terrible abusive programming, then if there are ways that we can engage ourselves some way by learning about it first of all, and then putting action steps in place that can help us to heal. I want to give a shout out to this book. I've only read like a chapter and a half of it, but it's shaping up to be a really good read. But there's others to it. I think Bradshaw is one of them. I could be wrong. I just heard that by the by. And of course the work of Stefan Molyneux too, on his whole thing is peaceful parenting, because there's ourselves for sure. How are we going to improve ourselves based on the trauma? But how are we going to pay it forward into next generations? And then in the next generations, if it's true, and it probably is true, that 80% or whatever of the abuse that's put on children, which ends up debilitating future generations, is put forth by the parenting, then our job as parents is to be peaceful parents, understanding parents, to treat children as human beings who have their unique desires and so on. So our job is not to mold children into anything. It is to protect them and to encourage them to be themselves. It's just a thought anyway. So I wanted to shout out about this book, and I wanted to just give some words on what I feel are the importance of being aware of the damage that we may have within. And because if there's things holding us back and we're looking all over the place but we're not looking within, then we potentially are missing a huge part of the equation as to why we're not living the life that we really want to live. Hope this is helpful. I know it's just one man's words, but I had to say them anyway because I wanted to, and I think they're important. Hope to talk again soon. My name is Steve. Bye-bye.